Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's roundtable. This is actually an extension of our video series on Techstrong TV called AppSec Today. And this is the live version and we have a great panel today. Thank you for joining us. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'm CTO with Techstrong Group and also principal analyst with our research firm, Techstrong Research. And application security is one of the top topics that many people are working on, talking about, trying to address, trying to improve as we do more together with application and security, whether it be through DevSecOps or traditional network and software security. So we have a great panel today. I'd like to introduce a couple of things to you about today's roundtable. This is being recorded, and everyone who signed up for this event, whether they showed up or were busy, we will send an email to you with a link to the recording. So you're free to share that with other people. If you go back, you got called off to be on a call and you missed something, you can also pick it up that way too. So we'll get an email with that information. The second is that we have a very active panel, but we also have a very active chat. And I see already we have folks jumping in with where they're from, and I bet we have a very international audience, just as we do with our panel. So the chat really actually helps drive our show. It drives our conversation. It's not just a comment and sort of everybody ignores what each other says. It is, we engage. We'll be talking to you on chat. We want you to throw your ideas, comments, reactions to what the panelists is saying. The panelists and I will be engaging with you through chat. And last but not least, this show, AppSec Today, is sponsored by Mend.io. And they've been great partners working with Techstrong and putting content together and ideas for panels like this. And as a thought leader in the application security space, I've put together a multidisciplinary panel of people from different companies. In some cases may compete in some areas, in other cases no. But that's what thought leaders do, is they help elevate the conversation across everybody who's trying to help contribute to improving our application security. So thanks to our friends at Mend.io for being wonderful partners and for sponsoring today's roundtable. So with that, let's go ahead and pull down the tile, the intro graphic there. And I'm going to go ahead and have Reese have you introduce yourself. Each of the panelists is going to say a little bit about themselves and what company they work with. Jump right in there, Reese.
Hi, Mitch. Thanks for that introduction. Hi, everyone in the audience. So my name is Reese Arkins. I'm VP Product at Mend.io, as Mitch said. We're really happy to be hosting this roundtable and got some great other panelists here. So a little bit about myself. I joined Mend about 4 years ago, and I have a real interest in developer tooling and automation, and particularly in supply chain security, as do some of my other panelists. So off to Tanya next. Thanks, Tanya.
I'm the CEO and founder, also known as head nerd at We Hack Purple. And I wrote a book about AppSec, and I talk a lot about securing software. And next, I want to pick Derek.
Thanks, Tanya. So I'm Derek Weeks. I am former SVP at the Linux Foundation, also former VP at Sonatype, where I wrote the State of the Software Supply Chain report every year for them from 2015 to 2020. Talk a lot about AppSec, DevOps, and DevSecOps. And Vandana, you are next for the intro.
Thank you, Derek. Hi, everyone. I'm Vandana. I'm currently based out of India. I'm working for a company named Sneak, and I also serve on OWASP board. OWASP is an application security community, so I'm part of it. Now, Adam.
Thanks, Vandana. I'm Adam Berman. I'm the head of SemGrip supply chain over at recently renamed SemGrip, helping shepherd our supply chain security products out the door. Really love focusing on developer-focused security tooling, and really excited to be working with y'all and talking with y'all today.
Fantastic. Now everybody knows why I'm so excited about this panel. We have authors, we have people who've been doing research and reports, as well as products and practitioners. A little bit of everything. I think our audience, I know we'll have a lot of fun, and I'll get a lot of knowledge and information from you all. So let's get right into our topic. I will put a link to the report. So folks who are interested in downloading the malicious packages report that Men put together, you might have seen that in the description when you registered for this roundtable. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that throughout our conversation, though the roundtable isn't specifically to dive into every detail of the report, but really talk about the topic. So there were some kind of jumping out things, jumping out information. And I think the biggest stat, Reese, was around the 315% increase in malicious packages that were published, measured between start of 2021 or into 2021 to the end of 2022, which, yeah, and we were discussing before we got started, and that trajectory isn't kind of bent yet. So we got a ways to go. Help us out with kind of what you saw in the research and maybe how that informs your thinking about AppSec.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. So, the exact numbers are hard to pin down. Obviously, we've picked a number and described why. Everybody agrees that the numbers are going up a lot. What we're seeing, though, is that there is like a very concerted effort from people to attack the supply chain through like intentionally malicious packages. So, there's been graphs. Derek is responsible for a bunch of great ones in the past about like the state of CVEs and vulnerabilities and severity levels and things like that. The thing with CVEs is that you can get them, but not necessarily be exploitable, or even if you're exploitable, you may not be exploited. What we found is that, like, to give some context, with those figures of malicious packages, about 85% of those were stealing credentials. So pretty much, if you were victim of it, you're exploited as a rule, and that does change the game a lot, because it shifts from a need to go from, I'll say, detection concepts like, oh, you have something of concern here, to you really need prevention. Otherwise you're like a virus scanner that just says, oh, that attachment you opened yesterday, yeah, that was not a good idea. So it shifted the landscape a bit from being able to be, as long as you were quite responsive, you could feel safe, reasonably safe from vulnerabilities, to one where it's like people are intentionally attacking and exploiting.
Yeah, I think part of, there are a lot of different aspects when you look at software supply chains and kind of where should the most concern be. And for some organizations, you say, well, we need to secure our software supply chain, and our developers are using, open source packages that have malicious intent in them. But I like to look further back in the software supply chain. Like, what are the sources of these things, and why is this a problem? And my focus often goes to the adversaries, right? So adversaries are an efficient bunch of people that go to the easiest places to exploit. And if you look at why this is happening, part of that is just the efficiency of the attack. When I was at the Linux Foundation, as well as at Sonatype, we did surveys every year, and we asked people, are you producing a software bill of materials? And the percentage of organizations that were, not comprehensively, but just anywhere in any little corner of your organization, usually hovered between 40 and 50%, probably from 2016 to 2023. And that says more than half of organizations aren't even paying attention or documenting or keeping track of what they're using. And that means if you're an adversary and you want to get someone to download a malicious package and not even check whether it's good or bad or has a vulnerability, half of your intended audience for that is an efficient gain, for you into that organization, or efficient path. And I think that's really what we have to be, concerned about. The adversaries are here and putting malicious packages out there because it's very efficient for them.
Yeah, and thinking about efficiency there too, there's like, on the vulnerability side, we see like in our DevOps, like observability channels, people blasting the internet, like trying to find people on old versions of WordPress or whatever, trying to see if there's anyone who has vulnerabilities that are exploitable. That becomes computationally expensive as the vulnerabilities stack up, and you have to keep on spraying the whole internet to find people. For malicious packages, you do one thing. You make like one like clever move to be able to get a malicious package up there and then wait for like victims to become prey. And it really changes the calculus too, as you were saying, Reese, that like you can have a vulnerability, an exploitable vulnerability in your system for years and never be impacted. But like the moment that you download that malicious dependency, you're impacted. So it like changes the window and like how AppSec teams have to respond to it. It's like the math problem is very different, both for, as you were saying, for the attackers and for the defenders. It really changes like where AppSec people need to get involved in protecting against them.
Recently, I was told, so I don't work at Google, but I have a lot of friends that work there. And they just started, I believe it's the Project Zero team, started releasing information about kind of like the chatter they hear on the dark web about different groups, and specifically which known vulnerabilities in packages they're starting to look for. And they're just started releasing it as an intelligence feed. And I heard about it, but I haven't got a copy of it yet. But I think that would be a really interesting thing for companies to be able to hear, oh, like organizations, like criminal organizations, are specifically targeting like these specific CVEs, or maybe they're not even in CVE format yet, but known vulnerabilities within whatever thing. Knowing that they're coming for you might be able, even if it's only, like just groups are looking at this specific one, we can know, okay, so everyone just patch that one right now.
The concept of malicious package is quite like confronting because, with CVEs, it's a little bit like a product recall, right? You sometimes might read, there's some eggs, you might get sick from salmonella. Out of abundance of caution, return them. Okay. That's one way. Malicious packages is like the equivalent of them saying they are poisoning your broccoli. You know what I mean? Like they are trying to get you, like beware. It's like a whole different level of like, they're out to get me. This is not like an accident. This is intentional. A lot of users of open source, in fact, the most really have not really woken up to that new concept, but it's quite confronting when they do.
Yeah, and I think part of the issue there, if you look at supply chains in general, if you look at the supply chain for broccoli, right, or automobiles or whatever, it's very well known. And if you want to do a recall on broccoli, what farms distributed to what companies, distributed to what grocery stores. When it comes to open source, if there's a recall on an NPM package, there's no way to figure out who actually downloaded that on a mass scale. So it's more like, hey, there's a malicious package out there. If you weren't listening to me saying that on a broad scale, there is no recall methodology here.
Jump in there, Vandana. Vandana has a little bit of a delay. So
absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. So I agree, especially if we talk about the statistics. I was reading one of the report where it was mentioned that there's a big increase, 30% increase in the number of new open source vulnerabilities. And when we talk about these open source vulnerabilities, on the whole internet, we talk about 80 to 90% is open source. So it becomes even more imperative we get to know what we have in our house. Like we have doors and windows in our house. When we go out, especially for a vacation, we want to close everything. If we lose anything open, what will happen? The thieves might come in, which we do not want. And we've been seeing cases where these things have happened due to malicious packages and open source ecosystem. It is just that we need to be extra cautious about that. Or what will happen? We would be prey to breaches like we were dealing with Log4j recently. We still talk about it. Why? These packages are there. Now, there are vulnerabilities, but at the same time, there could be an attacker who would maybe doing typo squatting, where they change the name and look like and feel like that, yes, it is the legitimate one. And even so, just before the session, I was reading MEN report where they've highlighted specifically around the Circle CI incident. Now, what the whole CI/CD vendor, what they can do is they can highlight that, yes, we are the legitimate repo, and from here you can download. I think these are the things which are very, very important. Or whatever we do, we might fall prey of that. And if I talk about NPM ecosystem again, or JavaScript ecosystem, it is again the most popular programming language for open source projects and highest number of vulnerabilities and malicious packages too. So a lot to deal with that.
One of the my reaction around malicious packages is very similar to there have been reports, and I think we're getting more cognizant of container distribution, just like we did with the virtual images with VMware and things. Those are essentially kind of payload distribution systems. If you can get your malicious code in the distribution system, it's kind of like the spy movie, right? Let's taint the water upstream, and then everyone will get infected with whatever contagion we're launching into the system. It's a pretty smart thing to go after, and there are mechanisms that, not everybody can just load whatever package up, at least, to Docker, to the Docker library and VMware and others. So there are some mechanisms to help cut down on that, but it's not perfect. It's certainly imperfect science. So if you can't 100% guarantee the source can catch it, what are we as the practitioners, or helping our customers as practitioners, what are the things we can do to help them not just let stuff roll into our software unknowns to us, and now we're suddenly part of the distribution system?
I feel like so just to clarify for the audience, so this is about intentionally malicious packages and third-party dependencies, rather than things where the people that made the thing had the best interests at heart and were creating open source because they wanted to share useful, awesome code with the world. And so if things are are intentionally malicious, I think it would be hard for an automated tool to be able to pick things like that up. And usually when I work with clients and customers and just people trying to build an AppSec program that works, I'm like, listen, what we want to focus on is not, oh, that scary thing we saw in the news. We want to have reliably consistent releases that are as secure as we are comfortable as an organization to accept that risk. And we can freak out. So like when Log4j was happening, it was in a lot of places. Obviously, it had to be addressed immediately. But if we freak out that there's like 4 malicious packages that came out this month and we don't know what they're in, like we can't realistically, like the average company with like 50 devs, we can't spend tons of time reviewing every single open source piece of software. So instead, what I tend to do is I focus on having a secure system development lifecycle. I do all the steps that I can, and then I listen to all the news possible. I talk to all my friends. I'm on all the alerts to hear all the things. And then if something scary pops up, I'm like, okay, we have some work this week. Rather than having all of the team kind of freaking out, especially executives, I heard about this. I'm like, don't worry. We have these things that we can do to protect against it. Because I find, for me personally, and it's okay if everyone else disagrees with me, because maybe that's not where your specialty lies, but like there's only so many AppSec dollars, and I want to spend them as wisely as I possibly can for the client. And like they only have so much time and so much expertise. And so anyway, I'm going to answer the person in the chat asking what we're talking about. And I want to hear everyone else's opinion, because like I know that's not the answer everyone was hoping for. Like, we do this in-depth research. That's not generally what I advise for the average company with an average AppSec program. What about everyone else?
I was going to say there's a lot of implicit reliance that the community has on some like central kind of ecosystem providers. Like it was a few years back, there was this little movement about trying to whether package distribution should be like kind of distributed and decentralized, and maybe these big bad companies running it are a problem. And the reality is, whenever there is a problem, whether it is traditional vulnerabilities or now malicious packages, you can see that people clearly have an expectation that there's these central gatekeepers who should be protecting them from it. You'll see the history and they'll be like, it was discovered at this point and some message, and if I pick on someone who I'm about to compliment, people will be like, and why didn't and it took 37 minutes for NPM to respond and take it down. People have this really intense expectation that these central gatekeepers are like somehow going to protect them, from everything. But on that note, NPM and really GitHub did something great recently, which is provenance of packages. So as an example, we recently did a wave of notifications of malicious packages to our customers. And in one case, a customer came back and said, this is a false positive. Like, look, there is nothing malicious in this package. And they pointed actually to GitHub. And yes, there was no malicious code in release 4.1.2 on GitHub, because the attacker had intentionally put one lot of code on GitHub and different code in the actual package that was published. And what NPM recently have introduced is package provenance, meaning that essentially you can verify that what is published as the package to NPM really was built from the source code it says it was on GitHub. And so that, for example, is a really good step forward, where not every startup or company of any size has to be checking everything. If eventually we get to the point where you can verify that at the very least the code that you are consuming comes from the source which it claims it came from, because at least then you have that kind of 1,000 eyeballs concept, instead of having to somehow analyze binaries or artifacts.
Yeah, I think the work that is being
I would like.
Oh, go ahead, Vandana.
No, I was just adding on to what Tanya and Rice said, that when we talk about understanding the code consumption, especially from the maintainers end, I think that's a very valid point, because it can happen from the maintainer end itself. If I go back a little while, where there was an issue with caller and faker. So these are two very major packages in the NPM ecosystem, where the maintainers himself actually added the malicious content to caller library, where there was a loop condition which was added. And for faker, the code itself was removed. Now, it again open a can of worms, where can we trust those open source packages or not? Now, can we trust the maintainers themselves or not? And if yes, or if no, what shall we do? So there are certain, I think, best practices within organization, like Derek mentioned in the beginning about SBOMs. We need to pull in the right SBOM set of material, wherein we can say this package we have. Now, there is a vulnerability, but let's go back at the earliest to the older version, or if not this, then let's move on to the other package. But I think those decisions have to be taken by the organizations as early as possible, while we talk about the community. So it goes separately to different organizations, because different organizations have a different way of working. We wouldn't be able to comply the same to every organization. Let's say what organizations to do. Maybe the NPM repository, Java systems can tell, but then again, organizations have to build their own ecosystem to take action on such cases.
Yeah, I was just going to add in, play a little off of what Riss said about the repositories. So whether it's Maven Central or the NPM repository, rubygems, or the PyPy repository, work has gotten a lot better there with the teams responsible for operating those repositories, and also collaborating with the security industry, sometimes vendors, sometimes individual researchers, to understand what vulnerable packages are out there, and if there are malicious packages, to remove those from the repository. So often, in the case of a not intentional vulnerability in software, so a lot of the struts vulnerabilities over time were not malicious intent vulnerabilities. It was just poor coding practices or a mistake somewhere that someone found the vulnerability. Those packages or components are still up on those central repositories. In the case where malicious actors are doing malicious code injection, or changing something about a component and uploading a new version of that, or typo squatting, things like that, the repository managers are actually good at removing those from the repository once they're notified, and also working with the researchers to say, we need to pay more attention to this. We need to react a lot faster. And I won't name names of who was good or bad at doing this, but I know many years ago, sometimes researchers found malicious packages. The repositories were notified there's a malicious package there, and it could sit there for 3 days. and have thousands of downloads during that time because you couldn't reach the right person on the right security team who might have been on vacation then, or it's Friday afternoon and they didn't see it until Monday. But there's a lot of work that's been done more recently, I think, in a kind of public forum, more public forum within the Open Software Security Foundation and the Linux Foundation. They have a central repositories group that works on what do we do, what are our practices, how do we collaborate with one another to introduce those practices for the repository, because that's really the distribution point to the global development community. And that's just an important part of the whole supply chain initiative and keeping it secure.
Yeah, I really like how you differentiate, Derek, vulnerabilities that are unintentionally. We've all kind of
Tanya did it first. I just repeating a little of what she said.
Giving you a little more credit than I should, but yes. But that's important. Do all of the package managers, the most commonly used ones, PyPy and the others, outside of Linux Foundation, do they have pretty rigorous process for identifying and then getting malicious code removed from those, or do we have a lot of work yet to do?
I'll just say it, and I'm not tied to running any of these, and it's a really, really hard job with huge amounts of volume happening. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head now, but over 1 million packages and new versions contributed on a repository every year. Let's imagine that's the number. In Maven Central, when I was doing the software supply chain reports, 200 or 300 billion downloads a year. I think the number is probably even larger now. The NPM repository had 2 trillion downloads a year. Massive volumes of things happening there. They're getting better, but I think all of the maintainers of those repositories understand that they need to get better. They're working to get better. And are they best in class? I imagine if you talk to them, they'd say, we're doing the best we can and we're getting better. I don't think best in class has been defined by anyone yet.
There's not anybody who's like the model of, if you did it like this package manager.
I'll just say, Sonatype and Maven Central is probably the model that everyone would like to be around. And those are specifically Java open source components. They've had the most rigor behind that. But NPM, once they were acquired by Microsoft and GitHub, things have gotten better in that repository. But still, I think there's a ton of work to do. And that's why the OpenSSF working group is focused on, we know there's an issue. We all want to improve it. Let's collaborate and work together.
Can I briefly?
Yeah.
So I feel like the industry, we take from the open source people, and then we don't give back very often. And I think there has to be some sort of incentive created for that. So I'm from Canada, so I talk about Canada a lot. And in Canada, we have Shopify. And the Shopify folks, they have a bug bounty. And so everything's written in Ruby on Rails. And so their AppSec team constantly fixes bugs within the Ruby gems and then pushes those fixes into the gems for everyone around the world, right? And they do it because they're like, well, we're the 3rd biggest realtor on the entire internet. We do all those little stores for, you've probably been in a Shopify store this week and not even realized it, if not several. And so they're like, oh, it's our responsibility. I'm like, why doesn't everyone feel this way? Like, because there's tons of gigantic companies with lots of money using open source in tons of their apps, and they're contributing 0 back. And how can we, so maybe this is off topic, but how can we create an incentive for that, right? Because we have these people who are like spending their weekends and evenings working for free doing this stuff. We can't be like, well, you suck for not writing perfectly secure code with 0 support and 0 tools to work with that. You know what I mean? Like maybe tooling companies could offer their tools for free or share some of their research back, or I don't know what the answer is, but if there's no incentives, it's really hard to fix this. What does everyone think?
Yeah, let me just throw a quick wrench into that.
Okay.
So someone contributes a fix to the latest Ruby Gems package.
Okay.
Right? what incentive is there for the developer to stop using the 4-year-old rubygems version of that package and not use the latest one that actually fixed it? Like, that is a gigantic problem of, I'm using the thing that's worked for me for 3 years, and I have no incentive to use the next one because my code's going to compile and not have a breaking change if I use that latest version.
So Derek, I have a quip for you on that one. We have a saying that updating your dependencies is like going to the dentist. If you only do it every 4 years, it's going to hurt. So, and the challenge is sometimes you have no choice, because when that like vulnerability comes along and it turns out that you got to make that 4-year leap that you thought you could keep, that's basically technical debt. So, mature software teams do understand that they need to stay at the very least reasonably up to date, because sometimes you don't get a choice about whether you got to upgrade or not.
Yeah, and that's even like in the best case scenario where you get the choice of going to the dentist or not. I think one of the hard parts too is like most of the dependencies we have in our systems are transitive dependencies where we didn't get to choose which ones are pulled in. And so then solving a problem that comes from a transitive dependency is like, well, we're relying on the package maintainer to bump the version before we even get the chance to like bump. We can't bump the version ourselves. And so, you end up with like the XKCD meme where like the whole internet is relying on like one package with one maintainer off in the corner, and then left pad happens and it gets pulled and the whole internet falls apart. So I feel like we talk to customers who feel like they just lack even control over their own destiny, where a malicious dependency could come out and they could be running best practices and doing everything to the best of their abilities, and they could still be hit by it, or a vulnerability is disclosed. And sure, there is a new version that is released, but there's no ability for them to upgrade to that version because the direct dependency hasn't upgraded yet. So they're stuck. We say, like, I think the best easiest path for people is like, hey, use lock files at least to like lock you into specific versions, and that's maybe the least amount of work and doesn't require changing your tooling often. But even then, like, that's only that's the first step. Yeah, it's like the being able to control your own destiny feels like an important part that sometimes people can't have.
Yeah, it is a dilemma. I mean, it's.
Can I something add to it?
Yeah, please do.
Actually, it's off the topic. We were talking about the maintainers, we are talking about the malicious dependencies and updating all of that. But there's one thing, if we have security champions, then we don't need to, half of the work is done, because they will understand that it is very important. Generally, I've seen developers and testers who are security advocates who actually preach about security, who understand security to even an extent where we say 40%. They have certain environments where any new vulnerability, which may be of critical nature, they know that they're using certain packages, then they keep a track of it. They make sure that they test in the environment and they make time to push it to production. Because if we say that we can take a time lag of 10 days to update a vulnerability, which means we are giving an attacker 10 days to exploit that in the environment. We might not be very well known, or maybe we are very well known in the industry, but you never know when the attacker hits us. So very, very important to have those security champions, security advocates who actually talk about these things. I think someone was saying that one person who knows about these things, I think Tanya or Rice was mentioning about it. If there's one person who understands and be on top of these vulnerabilities, which in itself means that these updates, if not everyone, but one person would read and share it with the other people as well. And it becomes even more interesting that we all get on the same page. I think that really helps.
There's a great question, a couple of great questions in the Q&A from Kathy. And one of them, I think, is we kind of sort of referred to this as there are package managers where people are doing this out of their goodwill, right? People who are managing and contributing those. And a lot of them are also commercial. Docker is one. And you mentioned, Derek, I think NMS being purchased by Microsoft, that Kathy is pointing out. That Java has surpassed Adobe as most frequently attacked, and their software distribution Does the dynamic change when a company acquires or builds their own package manager versus I'm an open source project, or I'm just doing this, on my own? Maybe it's outside of the Linux Foundation for what we either respect or what they have to, the requirements they have to meet.
I think so. I haven't done research in this area, but it's about incentives. And if the cheapest way to hit a whole bunch of people is to attack Adobe, they're going to attack Adobe, right? Like, if it's not that expensive and not that difficult, that's why malicious actors liked Flash, because Flash was wildly insecure. And I'm so glad it's dead now. Um, but I feel like if it's the easiest way to do it, they're going to do it, right? Not necessarily based on like, oh, we don't like the company that is Adobe, or we don't like Java. What does everyone else think? Because this is my opinion. But if you've actually done research, I'd like to know if there's specific reasons.
I think I'm just going to go back to adversary efficiency. If you look at a package that has 100 downloads a year, and you want to inject some malicious code into that, upload a new version, if you know the one company in the world that might have a huge Bitcoin wallet that you can steal from that uses that, and that's your entry point, fine. But as an adversary, to be most efficient, to get the most possible targets, I want to look at what package has 100,000 downloads a day or 1 million downloads a day, and then try to get my malicious code in that package, because I have more entry points. The entry point that I've built into that package will work in every instance of that package where it ends up. So I want to be most efficient as an adversary to get to the most popular packages that maybe aren't paying attention, become a contributor to those packages, maybe contribute a lot of good stuff for a number of weeks or a number of months. And then once trust is built, I insert my malicious code into that, and then, go on my exploit spree.
Yeah, like some time ago, we'll say a decade ago even, the most common way of attacking was through the network. It was network level attacks on companies. Now, as firewalls got better, people moved up to the application stack, like you said, Derek, with efficiency. And then if you think of attacking, so you got one approach, like I'm going to rob a bank, or I know I'm going to hack the bank's website, something like that, right? That's very much a direct attack. So to kind of use a metaphor, abuse a metaphor, the supply chain attack is kind of like, it's like the rainbow to the pot of gold. Like they jump on the rainbow and they don't know exactly where it's going to go, but they know there's lots of people using it. They might even know it's popular in the finance industry, for example, but pretty much if you get a popular enough piece of open source and you can exploit it, you're going to find users in finance industry, health industry, and things like that. You're going to ultimately find that kind of pot of gold.
I think the efficiency and incentives angle is an interesting one to explore. I talked to a CISO who said, like, hey, the best thing that happened to supply chain security was cryptocurrency, because so many of these malicious attacks are just then mining crypto on your servers, which is expensive, but perhaps less like fatal to a company than getting their credentials stolen or having a data breach or something like that. So okay, like AWS might refund you or something like that, or worst case, you end up with a big bill, but maybe you can recover from that. But I think that an interesting angle here too is, like, we should talk about also who open source is serving. It's interesting that, like, we're talking about professional communities, companies who are relying on open source, the same pool of packages that like hobbyists are relying on and contributing to. And like, is the incentive here, is the purpose of the community to serve companies and professional organizations, or is it to serve like the global community? And I think, like, we talk to companies that are like, okay, it's not just malicious packages we want to defend against. It's like, it's pretty easy to defend against, or we can just like clear off a whole category of packages that seem like just not the set of packages we might maintain. And I think, like, the app store that like Apple maintains is an interesting example of like the other world we could be in, where like, hey, there are just a set of packages that are vetted for professional use, that are professionally maintained packages or whatever they are. But I think that's not the world that I think a lot of us have chosen to be in. And so I think we have to we had this a little bit of cognitive dissonance here.
I think also that sometimes we forget that. So I was talking with someone last night that's not super technical, and they're like, well, why would someone do a cyber attack instead of just going in and stealing the money? I'm like, because bank robbers get dead. They die. Like in Canada, if you rob a bank, most of them die in the process. It's very rare you get away alive. And if you do, you're in jail. Like they rarely, like I know we watch movies like Ocean's 11, 12, whatever, and they're like, yeah, we took all the money. That's not what actually happens. They die. But when you make a malicious package and then put it, the chances of you getting caught are so low. And therefore the risk to the criminal is just how much time they spent on it. So it's way, way, way safer for them, which is why it sucks so much for us.
Much more anonymity too, right, Tanya?
Yes. So if we could make it so that we had to know who signed this code, so that we could, yeah, bank robbers get dead, it's true. And so if we could find a way to make it more risky for them, so not only make it more difficult and expensive for them, but make it risky where they get caught significantly more often, I think that would change the game entirely. If we started arresting hackers on a regular basis, and I know that's not the way the internet was planned, but I think it could really help incentivize them to go do something else bad, or maybe get real jobs.
By the way, Mitch, it's probably important for us also to point out that, we're talking about, open source and vulnerabilities and malicious packages. But, just like if people talk about the risk of plugging random memory sticks into their computer, or, don't plug into your phone into random, power sockets at an airport. Those people aren't saying like, don't use memory sticks or don't ever charge your phone, right? It's a difference. So I think all of us here are not saying like, beware of open source, be scared or anything like that. We're kind of talking about some of the kind of edge risks and things like that from, companies who are using a lot of it. And like, for example, I personally, we very much promote like staying up to date with dependencies, not not sitting on a 4-year-old version because it's scary to change. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there too, that, ultimately using open source and keeping your open source up to date are essentially, well, in my opinion, the best way to go.
So Reese, when you were acquired, were you running the Renovate open source project? Is that what Men brought in when you were acquired?
Yeah, so I built the Renovate open source project and then was running it like as a service, and naturally the world gravitates towards as a service. So today Mend operates the same service, and most people prefer to have there's a level of trust, right? They prefer to have like people run things for them rather than to self-host everything.
Cool. You want to say a little bit about that the open source part of it for folks that don't know about Renovate?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it was a tool that was started to scratch an itch, which was basically, a multi-day kind of bug and problem in a production system, which was caused by an out-of-date piece of software. In that case, been unlucky enough to upgrade into a bug because some feature was needed, and then never upgrade, didn't upgrade again, didn't have a process of doing it. And so I realized it should be automated and built that. So it's open source for the purpose of updating open source. And these days it goes beyond, like Ruby and Python, but also into, like what we call cloud native, Kubernetes manifests and things like that. Ultimately, any code you didn't write yourself is a dependency. And in general, you're better to be up to date than, have that security debt or technical debt we talked about.
Yeah, I want to build off of what Terrence just put in the chat. And, this is critical to all of this. If we're talking about one malicious package, so it's, struts or bootstrap SaaS or, basic authable or, something that had malicious code in it, like you can fix and figure out how to fix that problem on kind of a one-off basis. But the volume of consumption that is happening out there requires tooling, and it requires automation as part of the process. If I say like, and I don't know the exact number, but let's say there are 100 million developers in the world, and those 100 million developers are downloading 3 trillion packages a year. The ability to go and understand what is the package, is it good, is it bad, should we use it, should we not? you can't manually assess any of that. So whether you have open source tools to do this, so OWASP, Vandana sits on the board. There are a ton of people. I know others here are involved in OWASP as well. Lots of free tooling that's available out there to help with looking at vulnerabilities and open source packages or creating SBOMs. There's also vendors out there that sell solutions across the board in this area. But in addition to having an AppSec team, in addition to having processes and practices, if you're not applying automation to this solution, you can't keep up. And that's been the case for more than a decade. This is not, oh, this is a new problem, start to pay attention. You're way, 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 way behind. You cannot manually assess everything your developers are bringing in. Absolutely impossible.
Yeah, I think the automation is key. I think one of the interesting parts here, though, is that the attacks themselves, we've done a bunch of investigation into like what malicious like code looks like. And I think we saw like people use SendGrup's an open source tool, guard dog. So the Datadog folks use that, wrapped it as a way to detect open source tools, open source attacks, malicious code statically. It's like the attacks aren't that sophisticated. And like, I think one day they probably will, like this is a cat and mouse game. They will get more sophisticated as we get better at detecting them. But so far, like the majority of malicious attacks seem to be like, I have something that is hard coded that runs on install that steals your credentials and sends it to some hard coded IP address. That's the kind of thing that can be automated relatively easily. It's not like you need to have really sophisticated in-house security researchers constantly figuring out the next generation of attacks. I think they're like, we've seen the first generation now, I think, of open source tools that can be like injected into your like CI/CD pipeline to prevent malicious dependencies from getting in there released. And I think we'll start to see better and better ones over the next year or so. But it's interesting, like I think Tanya, you said, like it could cost a small fortune to do this for every single package. Like I don't know. I think as the tooling gets better, I think this is going to become like a standard part of security tooling. Just like I think we thought of like SAST as incredibly expensive and time consuming for most people to use 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Today, it's more standard part of your first party code. I think that will change in the coming years as well.
Yeah, we saw in terms of, you said Adam, the sophistication. So I actually just Slack messaged one of our lead analysts before this. I'm like, hey, I'm doing this, roundtable now. Like, is there anything new, whatever? And he said, no, it's mostly still script kiddies, basically. And like to give you an idea, there's been multiple cases where a malicious attack, when they first pushed the code, they actually like broke the package. So like a package got broken, it wouldn't even run. And people look and they're like, oh, whoa, what was in that? And that was because, they basically got the, post-install, pre-install scripts wrong. What then happened is that those same kind of, script kiddies, if I'm being a bit dismissive, they would do a kind of like a dry run. And we caught on to that. And so what we noticed was that they would like clone the package they were going to attack, like the source code. They would add the kind of payload to it and publish that, not because anyone would download it, but so that they could test it. But then we could see which package they were going to attack. We ended up sounding a little bit crazy to some open source maintainers because we'd be like, we believe that, an attack is imminent on your packages, please rotate your credentials. And but yeah, the level of sophistication is thankfully still low. The question is, though, are there attackers at such a level of sophistication that none of us are finding it? So we're sitting there proud of ourselves, outwitting the script kiddies, and the state level actors have got some very, long games going.
Yeah, and you're right about that. Like there was I can't remember the name of the professor who like wrote that article about, you should have the threat model for like where your threat model needs to be. And like, hey, if the NSA is going to get you, they're going to get you. There's like no use protecting yourself against that. But I feel like, hey, we should be like practical about like, hey, we can protect ourselves from the script kiddies today. Hey, we should go do that. Do anyone remember that article, that famous paper? No. It's like if Mossad's going to get you, Mossad's going to get you.
Mm-hmm.
It almost seems like, yes, we want the package managers, do a diligent job and appreciate what they do and continue to get better. But it kind of reminds me of the old network security days of putting intrusion prevention systems or monitors in the network where we watch what's coming in and continuously putting signatures together. Because we're talking about automation, and I wonder, are we destined for a world where we sort of have a package manager firewall in front of all the sources that, yes, they're doing their job, and we're working with commercial companies or maybe other open source projects to essentially do our own filtering, because you need to add another layer to that and not build big security teams to go do that ourselves, because none of us have that resource as practitioners, or at least most of us don't. Thoughts? Let's use that as our kind of closing conversation. By the way, we have 4 gift cards we're going to give away here pretty quick, so don't leave, but we'll be sure to end before the top of the hour.
Yeah, so, I spent a lot of time talking about that, Mitch, and I went to organizations, and when I was at Sonatype, we had this product called the Nexus repository. There's also an equivalent type of product from JFrog called Artifactory. And that can be kind of the staging point from the central repositories to those repositories and then out to your developers, what's coming into your organization. Now, it would be great if everyone used that as the front door to your organization. But the analogy that I used for many years is, if you have 1,000 developers, you have 1,000 front doors of open source coming into your organization. If you have 10,000 developers, there are 10,000 front doors. And I think, part of the AppSec process is to say, if you limit the number of front doors and use the technology that's been out there for, over a decade of Nexus repository or Artifactory, of just saying, look, you can bring in any code you want, but it has to come through this location. And I know organizations that did that, and that gives you some control, because if you try and find and block every path every single one of your developers has to download something from the internet, it's not going to work. It's just, you can't keep up with it. Like, define the practice that would keep up with that. Not going to work. So you have to close the number of front doors where these things can come into your org. And that gives you a better chance of then taking some technology or process or, rule within your organization to say, here's what we're going to look for at that front door.
Yeah, I mean, that type of centralization is an opportunity and a threat. So when companies have set up centralization, then it does give them like an opportunity to kind of use that like choke point and leverage it to try to police it. The threat, I'd say, is that the majority of companies don't do that, and they kind of have this assumption that if they've centralized their open source downloading, that's somehow made them more secure. And the reality is they've just centralized the path through which a malicious package will be downloaded. No fault or offense, but whether it is a Nexus or an Artifactory, it'll just be the one that passes on the malicious package when they ask for it. So the threat is just that companies have a little bit of a misunderstanding that with centralization comes security. And the reality is you still need to be doing something of some sort to stop that. Otherwise, the packages still get downloaded.
May I add on? So I love the idea of only letting them download from a place where everything's been checked and we know it's secure. But I've never been able to get devs to agree to such terms, because they're like, but there's this such fun package over here. It's not in there. And I promise you it's nice, Tanya. I also feel like it assumes that we don't have devs all doing whatever they want. So I'd say maybe half the companies I work with, there's 4 different CI/CD pipelines. And I don't mean for Azure DevOps. I mean Azure DevOps and Circle CI and Bamboo and the Cucumber. I'm like, come on, guys. And then there'll be 20 tech stacks as well. So it's oh yeah, this team does Java and this team does .NET and this team does TypeScript and this, do you know what I mean? And they're all using different databases. And I was like, why does my job have to be so hard? And so I feel like in my dream world, we all have our code in the same code repository. In my dream world, we all use the same CI/CD, and I would love it if we would do that. But sometimes I have to compromise with the developers and compromise with the business, because they're like, do you want to make an enemy out of the 1,000 developers that work here, or would you like to kind of try to get along with them? So I'm like, I'm going to find a tool that interoperates with our 5 different CI/CDs, and I'm going to try to do this because I'm not their boss, and so I have to persuade them to work with me, and so I bend a lot to try to get more of what I want. Like, I'm like, is this the hill I want to die on? And usually the answer is no, unless it's Log4j, and then it's yes. But I feel like I really like all the points. I want to hear what everyone else has to say about this. How about that? And if you got them to all agree to go through the exact same place and only use those packages, I need you to tell me after how you did that and if it involved bribery.
Or if you still work there.
Yeah, I can share some lessons on that offline. I know someone. I know a couple of people that did it.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
last
I would
comment.
like to add
Vandana.
something to it. Yeah. So I think we should treat these dependencies as it like we are plumbing the house. If we don't think about them until something goes wrong, then we would have major headaches in the next steps for sure. So we'll have to be very, very cautious. These can't be scary at all times, because if we scare from them, we would try and avoid them. So we need to embrace that we will be vulnerable. These things will happen, attacks will happen, we will have vulnerable dependencies. But how we act upon them, I think that's one thing we all should take care of. If we start looking towards that in a positive way, I am sure we will have safer environments, if not completely safe.
Fantastic. Well, we just have a few minutes left. I hate to cut off the conversation because I know we could go 3 more hours talking about this. So I want to announce who our gift card winners are first, and then I'll do a quick wrap up. Our $425 Amazon gift card winners are Gabriella R., Thalanga M., Roberto H., and Michael N. So congratulations. The folks at Techstrong will get a hold of you about how to get those gift cards. Just some takeaways for me listening to our conversation. And I appreciate everything that all of you have offered about this. It's a multi-dimensional problem as well as solution. And the things that jumped out to me as, yes, package managers, commercial and those that are being done, privately, are challenged and need to, of course, continue to up their game. But it's also the central repositories, whether it is the GitHubs of the world making improvements. It seems that as the code is integrated, that's also a great place. Like you talked about Artifactory, I think Derek is one of the many options of where that can happen. So maybe it's not plugging all the holes in the dike of these are the only places you can get code from. Maybe that works in some environments. Most developers, as soon as you say thou shalt, they see that as the eye of Sauron and immediately are looking for a different way to get to Mount Doom, and take you down. So that usually is not a great answer, at least in my experience. So it seems like maybe we're back to the CI/CD and the repository and some of those things being a great place where that comes together. Of course, then we could also do, SaaS testing and other things to go along with it from that process. So not that I have any of the answers for that, but those are some of the things that I took away from what you all said, in addition to dependency management and SBOMs. So I think we have a number of tools, a number of approaches to help. There's no secret recipe yet, I think, that works for everybody. And of course, the attack surface and the attack approaches are going to change, continue to evolve too. So those are my final comments. I want to thank Reese very much for being here and for Men sponsoring this great conversation. Tanya, great to have you join us. Derek, longtime friend, good to have you on again. I need to see you in person again someday. We'll figure out where that is. And Vandana joining us. Love your contributions as well. And of course, Adam, appreciate you being with us today, and great contributions by everyone. We are 1 minute from the top of the hour, so we're going to drop this off right here. Let everybody get onto their next Zoom call, or maybe writing code or whatever they're doing, something productive. But we want to thank you for joining us today. And we hope that we all will help each other work together to get more safe application software. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Mitch.